Hello and welcome to this edition of ScanOnline Access Points, where we talk about the mobile technology, wireless networks, and IoT innovations that are impacting supply chains and manufacturing worldwide. I'm Jeff Goldstein, joining you live from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm here with my friend Brian Graves from our ScanOnline headquarters. For more on the facts and opinions shared on today's show, you can send us messages to questions@scanonline.com, or you can find us at www.scanonline.com. If you like what you hear today, please hit the subscribe button to our YouTube page, or you can find the rest of our team at ScanOnline's LinkedIn page. So now that we got all that out of the way, how you doing today, Brian?
Doing great. I hope you are.
Yeah. Well, this is our maiden voyage into podcasting after all. So I'm trying to keep a sunny disposition. This could go one way or the other, of course. So
I think we're going to get famous.
You know what? If we got viral, then maybe I need to start a TikTok page. I don't know. That's not really my vibe, but maybe now's the time. I don't know. But
I think we're more likely to get a virus before we go viral. I mean,
or a viral infection from the outside world.
That's right.
Get viral in other ways. I was going to ask you, how are the house renovations going? A lot of our listeners and viewers, they don't really know much about us yet. And I mean, we've been talking back and forth about it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be the typical specimen to be looking at doing house renovations on my own, but we took that project, my wife and I took on that project when we bought this house knowing full well that it was going to be a long and arduous task, and it has been exactly that. So done with the floors, we're done with most of the painting on one level, and we're trying to raise ceilings in the upstairs of that house. I live in a construction project, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you would be the perfect candidate for that show, This Old House, I think. You remember that one?
I'd be the perfect candidate, because don't they come in and do it for you?
Pretty much. I mean, then they play some really cool like folk music the whole time. I mean, the kind of show that you want to sit down and maybe just listen to. You don't even need to watch it.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's really cool. I know that's a labor of love, and I love hearing about that. I mean, I live in, you can't even tell. I mean, well, I guess our viewers can't even tell, but I live in a place that's probably half the size of what you have. So hearing somebody else's experience is always cool.
Well, I'm living in half of the size of what I've got, because all the rest is under construction. So there you have it.
Yeah, I guess different sides of the fence there for sure. Let's just go ahead and get this first pod off the ground. What do you say?
Sounds great. I'm here.
All right. So when I think about this podcast journey, I mean, really, there were three reasons why we started it. We wanted to cover the things that we hear about in the field. We wanted to, really address some of that news that's happening around our business. And then the other thing is that we wanted to give voice to the customer, and, podcasts as they be, they're kind of a megaphone for a bigger, wider audience.
Right.
It just makes sense for us, because we are those, those customer centric providers that really try to, create our solutions around, what that unique business is doing, of course. So,
right.
More or less, we talked about, some of your travels on the road. And it just seems like a lot of the buzz that we're getting, or rather a lot of the buzz that you're getting, is around a concept that isn't maybe new to this world, but is kind of new to our industry. And that is that general idea in I guess, more or less a general offering for, companies like ours, that is known as a service. So let me just leave it there for starters and just ask you straight up, what is as a service? How would you best describe it, so we can kind of set a baseline for this pod?
Well, I mean, the as a service model, as you just said, it's not new. It certainly has been growing exponentially over the last few years. But what is new is looking at some of the physicality of as a service that has taken place over the last few years. And what I mean by that is, I think maybe the best way to go ahead and describe a definition of putting a baseline of what as a service is. But when you look at an as a service model, you're looking at really referring to any business model that presents something, Jeff, really anything goods or services, and it's presented as an offering to the customer as an ongoing service as compared to a finished product. Does that make any sense?
It does.
So I go back to being a little bit of a younger man and really being surprised as I was beginning my journey career-wise in the corporate world, coming into at the time coming into my corporate office, which was out in Chicago, which I think is where you're from.
Mhm.
But going into the corporate office up there in Chicago and traveling up there and seeing all of these amazing, gigantic trees that they were growing in the atrium in the front of that. And that was really my first understanding of what an as a service model was, because as I found out as I worked my way up the chain there, and at some point along the way became responsible for the maintenance of that facility in terms of looking at paying the bills, I realized somewhere along the way that we didn't own any of those plants.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else came in and planted those plants and put them in all the planters around the atrium, and then somebody else would come in and water them. We didn't own them. We weren't responsible to take care of them. They were just there for our benefit, and we were paying somebody else to come in and do that. So that's really what my first introduction to an as-a-service model would be. Obviously, things have moved along now, and when you're talking about as a service, you're talking about software as a service or hardware as a service, or my favorite one, when they go XaaS, which is everything as a service. It really comes down to saying, okay, I've got these goods, I've got this service industry service, or I've got these soft goods and like software that we're going to offer out as a continuing ongoing service that is not having to be owned by the customer that's paying for that service, nor are they responsible for maintaining it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So really it is kind of a concierge sort of idea that we're bringing to the table, whether it's us or whether it's even like a car leasing program, because in some ways, I mean, even the car leasing programs, they've gone from just being a financial model to also a physical model. So with that said, you would say the benefits to an as a service model are both financial and physical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, you're starting to see that more and more. I mean, I think initially the as a service model started out to be something that was more of a financial model because of the way that it pushed out, but it's becoming very, very physical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've seen that. There's I can't even tell you how many acronyms are out there at this point, but it really seems like it is bleeding into both of those worlds now, right? Where it's, at first it's like, well, it'd be nice to be able to pay for this and have everything that we consider a la carte now inclusive, but now it has to be more than that, right? So we're seeing a lot more of these companies offer almost like the front desk of a hotel, with a legitimate concierge. They may be giving you directions, but they're giving you also reservations. They're giving you insight into other places. They're showing you basically the best way to experience the city.
Right.
And that's kind of, what they're doing in a technology sense. They're giving you a best way to experience that technology, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So let's just go ahead and rip off the Band-Aid here. I mean, it seems like we're kind of starting to allude to more or less what it is that we do within as a service. And that's by the way of what we call the ScanOnline One Solution. So I think we can pivot to that. And I think our listeners may want to understand that a little bit more.
Well, when you look at maybe some of the features and benefits of an as a service model, I mean, obviously you can rattle them off, and depending on which industry you're looking at, those features and those benefits may change a bit. But on our side of the fence, when we're looking at technology, number one, you're looking at just an upfront lower investment to get started. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity, again, in our part of the industry for a customer to be able to get premium hardware, what we would call rugged mobility solutions. And it becomes accessible to the customer because of the financial piece of that model. Mm-hmm. when you're talking about like software as a service, the benefit is probably that continuous software solution improvement without those long maintenance windows or having to have in-house programmers to be able to continually update that software. Really, and the overall time investment of a solution that you buy as a model is lower in terms of hiring and training and all of that ongoing talent search that has to happen to say, all right, we've got to keep whatever this product is, or whatever that, whether that's a hard good or whether it's a software service or just a service. There's a constant talent search that goes on to keep these things refreshed and to keep them fresh and live. So that obviously goes away when you're looking at a company that can hire exactly what they're looking for, and the company that they're hiring to do that will have expertise in those critical areas. Some of the most challenging critical areas you see are things like CRMs and being able to manage that customer relation, accounting, inventory management, logistics, HR, so all of those things that are constantly changing. Tax laws change, routes change. As you look at all of those changes, being able to hire that out as a service becomes palpable when you've got this as a service. It lowers that cost of entry becomes lower.
Yes.
And I that probably didn't answer the question with regard to where we're at, but I'll stop there and see if you've got a follow-up here.
I mean, honestly, when it comes to us, I guess, speaking to our listeners here, or our viewers who are seeing our wonderful mugs on a Tuesday, it really comes down to what I like to think of as 4 tiers, the hardware, the software, the maintenance, and then the managed services. I mean, you could probably draw some conclusions if you are a little bit more tech savvy on, that are listening to this, around what each one of those platforms are. But I guess what you really need to think about, without going into a ton of detail, is that it is an all-inclusive program where you're going to be getting one sum over all of that, depending on how you want it to be contracted out, because you don't necessarily, we don't want to, just like, they say in the software world, we don't want to give you a bloated solution. We don't want to give you something that you don't need. We want to give you exactly what it is that you do need. So, really, we're looking at this in terms of how can we offer you the services that you may have been missing, under a different set of circumstances, and just wrap everything else around that hardware, that software, and that maintenance plan, so that, more or less, it's something that works in the background. Those were a lot of words. I hope I kind of nailed it there. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, what we're trying to do with One Solution, Jeff, is might be similar to other as a service models that already exist out there in the tech world. And when you talk about specific to the verticals that we focus on, it's similar. One Solution similar in the fact that we're trying to provide solutions for the most common problems that the verticals that we follow, being manufacturing and distribution, warehousing. Those companies have a common set of challenging and critical needs that come up around receiving, warehousing, and keeping track of inventory. And then obviously the backside of that is getting that inventory that they're warehousing and keeping track of out to their targeted customers. And that's, for our verticals across the warehousing and the manufacturing, it's omni-channel. We're talking about retail, we're talking about the industrial supply side of the business as well. So when you start looking at the way that e-commerce has changed, especially coming out of COVID, and we blame a lot of things on the pandemic, but one of the things that has happened, maybe in a more positive light, is that it has streamlined and really put the supply chain and the logistics of the supply chain in focus. So from an industry that we're involved with, there's a similar set of challenges that go along with that. Honestly, though, that's where the similarities end for what we're doing with One Solution versus what you see in these software as a service models, these other as a service models. We're fairly unique in the fact that we're not looking at just a financial service model around One Solution. We really are looking at trying to achieve several critical goals and put that into a complete one-time solution for our customer. And I guess a definition of that would be in order. So the idea would be to take what we're offering in hardware. That's a no-brainer. If you're doing inventory management, you're trying to track the receiving of goods, the inventorying and storing of goods, and then the shipping of goods out the door at the other end. Or if you're a manufacturer and you're trying to keep track of that entire chain of custody on every part that comes from every vendor and supplier that goes into each of the products that you make, and then you start that whole logistics chain as well out to delivery. Hardware, it becomes a necessary piece of that, whether you're talking about fixed industrial scanners or handheld mobile computers or RFID. I mean, there's a lot of different solutions that go around that, but that hardware is just one component of that solution. Now you take the deployment of that hardware and all of the installation of that, whether you're talking about the infrastructure of like the WLAN, all of the edge products. You've got cameras and security and safety equipment and right down to that inventory management piece. Also, the hardware management software that goes on a lot of that infrastructure. So mobile device management, several key industry names out there, 42 Gears or SODI. And when you start looking at, or Iron Mobile, when you start looking at the software that resides on some of that mobile computing to be able to track that hardware around the warehouse, or to be able to push updates and changes to that operationally, not without having to be on site, to be able to do that remotely. And operational software also, such as like terminal emulation software, Wavelength being a big name for that. Production software comes into this, manufacturing execution systems. So if you're a manufacturer, you need an MES system. Obviously, the back end WMS systems for being able to store all this. We're trying to take all of those components and pieces and then put the managed services, the physical managed services that we offer, that around the clock monitoring, that tech support, the RMA management for when you've got device issues or you've got software issues that need to be escalated. So either that piece can be that individual item can be repaired or replaced, the spare pulling of those things. Our One Solution is trying to take all of that and roll it into one per device model cost. And this is going to allow our customers to have easier budgeting, because now they can say, all right, we're looking at a site, or we're looking at a particular project, and we know exactly what the infrastructure is going to be able to put that in. And we also know now, coming through One Solution from ScanOnline, this is what the cost of that gear up is going to be. This is what that life cycle management costs. What is the cost of this thing going to be? That's great to put it in, but what's the cost of this item going to be over the next 3 to 5 years? Well, if you're doing this as a service, you know exactly what the cost of that's going to be for every single individual user you've got through that entire enterprise.
Yeah, every single time. Okay, so this all sounds good from a benefit standpoint, especially when it comes to working with us on our One Solution. But I know a lot of people that are going to be listening to this are, going to come from the IT world, and to be completely honest, they could have a little bit of cold feet. And I mean, let me just put it out there. I mean, more or less, does this plan sound like a way of outsourcing their jobs? I mean, I don't I don't see it that way because obviously we come from, our world, and, we wouldn't put something out there that could, get people to run from us. But what would you say to those folks that are listening?
Well, again, you said, are we putting this out there as a way to, from the benefits perspective of it? I think you have to look at this as being a partnership. And I think that if you're looking at a partnership, one of those pieces in partnership that you're always looking for is the ability to be able to co-manage a solution. And one of the pieces or the bedrock of as a service solutions in general is to be able to free up or to give not resource heavy or laden companies the ability to be more productive with the time of the resources that it does have. So I don't think that if you've got a managed service provider that's doing what they're supposed to be doing, that this is something that should be looked at in terms of a pure outsourcing play and a headcount reduction project for most management. I don't think that most upper management is looking at it in terms of that. They're looking at they're really looking at it in terms of efficiency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, gotcha. Let's just step back here for a minute then and just really break down the basics, because they now that they understand that, okay, these are, people that aren't going to be basically giving me a John Deere letter here. What really makes for a good professional service provider, especially for those folks, in our industry from our experience?
Right. Well, in my opinion, I think that a good managed service provider does, as we've already talked about, offer that co-management approach and platform. They need to be able to offload the daily challenges that confront most IT staff.
Yeah.
The basic things. We know that IT staffs aren't getting bigger. Conversely, they're getting smaller. And because so much of the world, especially with the IoT, the Internet of Things, that IT staffs are being stretched in terms of even the number of people available to take those jobs. Because there's so much more IT staff that's needed, because so much more of our life is going online. It's going to the cloud. It's becoming as a service. IT has now become stretched just in the number of people available. At the same time that staff is reducing, what they're being asked to do is getting bigger. It's becoming more critical. It's becoming more prevalent. It used to be that a spreadsheet that was done on a computer, or even go before that and look at pencil and paper, something that was being tracked, that's never going to fly in this market, especially as fast as this market moves now. And it really doesn't matter what you're talking about in terms of goods and services. That market moves fast, and what the IT staff is being asked to do has gotten bigger. So will a good co-managed partnership necessarily move internal IT staff to be revenue generating? Because everybody always wants to talk about the revenue generators.
It's a fun word.
No, I think that's the very challenging measure of IT staff effectiveness today. What are the metrics by which you measure IT staff? And typically, there's very little. If you're in the CEO chair, or more specifically the CFO chair, there's very little revenue generating activity that happens on the side of IT today. I think the real question that you have to ask, though, is your IT infrastructure and your IT staff avoiding revenue downtime?
Yeah.
Are they stopping revenue bleed or revenue leak? And what do we mean by that? Is my IT solutions saving revenue, decreased downtime? Are we looking at efficient reporting metrics, meaning how much downtime have we had across the entire enterprise? Out of the corporate office, are we suffering billing issues? Are we having infrastructure downtimes in the warehouse? If we are, where is that happening? When is it happening? During what tasks does that happen? If you can isolate and bring that into the open, you can fix those problems. And that's all something that is that's being handled and being directed to by the IT staff right now today. Operations is who uses that, but really much of that information is being gathered from IT. You've got to have a managed service provider that's got proactive, targeted solutions to say, we see what these challenges are. We see how monitoring for these and looking at that is going to save that revenue producing downtime. And that's who I'd be looking for a managed service provider if I was in their shoes.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, one thing that just from listening to your thoughts there, if we're talking about, okay, let's get away from the idea of revenue generating and revenue saving. I mean, the pure cost behind hiring somebody, and we're not just talking about finances, we're talking about the time involvement. We're talking about the time involvement across multiple departments. I mean, you're not just asking, Bob from IT to do the interview. You're working with HR. You're working with other people that might not be within that specific sector at all that has to make that decision. There's testing. I mean, it could be, even though, there is such a high demand on IT workers, it is not as easy as flipping a switch like it might be in other industries. It is a very labor intensive and finance intensive task to hire these folks at this point. Maintenance is definitely one thing. But let's take it a step further. May not necessarily be a tier 2 type of task all the time. It may be, but let's talk about, inoperable devices, things that need repair. Let's break it down into this. Let's talk about mobile devices for a second. Let's say that I purchased, and this is just a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say that I purchase, the hardware through, your traditional value-added reseller. We call it VAR in our industry, which is us, basically. That's who we are. How would you compare the repair process through an as-a-service plan? And we can even break it down into who it is that, our one solution. How would you compare that versus, a traditional service model?
Well, I think that what you're trying to see in the marketplace today is kind of a hybrid of that model coming together. So I really do believe that when you start talking about deploying hardware for the first time into any enterprise space, especially in the space that we're in from a vertical perspective, where we're looking at rugged mobile devices or infrastructure that has to work in a very rugged, dirty environment where there's lots of activity and lots of potential harm to those devices. What you talk about, forklifts or just temperature extremes, dirt, moisture, et cetera, et cetera. I think obviously the OEM contract support that comes from the manufacturer themselves, these are really productive and great plans that start from the beginning of deployment of that device. However, when you're working through those plans and through those programs, having somebody to be able to manage that, it still requires somebody at that site to say, all right, I've got a device that's not functioning, or it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Having a partner who understands and knows that device works well, somebody who is partnered very well with the OEM manufacturer themselves, to be able to walk through that process and be able to be available. Again, when you're talking about a disparate warehouse out in the middle of fill in the blank, they don't necessarily have an IT person on that staff in that particular warehouse, certainly not there 24 hours a day or 7 days a week. And they're not going to be there on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, right?
I hope
but
not.
If you've got a managed service partner that understands that process and can be the backfill for that, not only can it be productive, not only can it be efficient, but It's another one of those revenue saving downtime things. So I think that what you really look at is that your managed service provider that's taking care of RMA support and taking care of that service support is somebody who's going to mesh together and be able to be that trusted advisor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we need to have that OEM support only? Do we need to have some benchtop repair support for when those contracts run out and they can't be renewed? If you pushed your assets to the place where that end of support from the manufacturer themselves has come into play, what do you do with that device after that? I mean, obviously there's a refresh cycle, but before that refresh cycle comes to fruition and budgets released to let that happen, how do you maintain that device after that? So that's really where a managed service provider that's taking care of both, not just selling you the device and not just doing updates, but also the very physical down and dirty piece of, I'm going to keep that device going and keep it healthy and keep it doing its job for as long as possible within that environment that it's in.
Yes. I mean, really, the elasticity of the One Solution plan or an as a service plan, if there is another one that's similar to it, it really extends to how the repairs are done then too, right?
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, okay, here comes the device. Let's troubleshoot it. Let's send a price out. That traditional model sometimes can be, I wouldn't say challenging, but I would say that it limits you as far as how far you take that repair, and it really only gives you, a certain set number of options. Whereas, an as a service plan really does break it back into sort of just like everything else in the program. It is a comprehensive look at servicing something throughout the entire life cycle. And I mean, I just don't, today I just don't see. Especially when you go in these facilities where there's hundreds upon hundreds of devices, I don't know if there's a better way to do it. I mean, have you seen it?
I have not.
Yeah, I mean,
this is exactly what One Solution in bringing this to market when we did was all about. It was to take a combination of everything that we saw that was industry facing, and it was best of breed and best of class, and say, how can we bring the financial piece of this, the deployment piece of this, the maintenance and physical management piece of this all together into one model and put it out there so that there is one place to be able to grab your need all the way through the entire cycle without having to look at multiple solutions to get this done.
Yeah. I mean, all in all, the as a service plan seems to just really fit those gaps that customer always, I like to say, plugged in, because there are things that they end up having to go elsewhere. They use another third party, and as we like to think at ScanOnline, we want to be an end-to-end solution provider. I mean, that term, mate, I mean, end to end, I mean, it's a phrase that's been used a million and one different ways, but it doesn't make it less true. That's what we strive to do. I know, I'm going to speak nicely of our competitors too. I know that's what they are trying to do as well. And, that's the One Solution, I think, takes it a step further. And
when the cameras aren't rolling, we say we want to be that one throat to choke.
Yes. Well, the cameras are rolling. So.
Well, don't record that part then.
Don't record that part. Okay, well, let me talk to our non-sponsors about that. Remember, we are not sponsored by anybody. We are prepared to take any check. We are prepared to take any plug here. We are an equal opportunity employer of all products. I don't know what else to say at this point. If you want to toss us some money, we'll figure out how to spend it, right?
I think that was your revenue pitch in full.
Yes, it was. Yes, and that's maybe another reason why I need to start a TikTok channel. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, that does it for us here at the ScanOnline Access Point podcast. That was Brian Graves. This is Jeff Goldstein signing off for the day. But before we do, I just want to remind you one last time to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can find the rest of our team on our LinkedIn page. That is the ScanOnline LinkedIn page, by the way. We hope we hit our mark, but if not, you can send us any questions to, questions@scanonline.com. And yeah, take care. And if you're in that high pressure field that is the supply chain, well, just know that we always got your back. See ya.
Excellent.